So the first limitation of when we look at monetary policy is to do with basically your demand for money. When you look at demand for money, we've discussed this in our sort of topics or discussion before, that when you look at demand for money looks like this. The liquidity preference curve is kind of a curve which is very, very steep at high interest rates. It's very, very steep, but then it becomes very flat. So, for example, if the government decides to increase money supply, if this is your money supply MS naught, and right now your interest rates are very low, let's say R naught. If the government decides to increase money supply, and why do you want to increase money supply? Well, you want to increase money supply because you want to make the interest rates go down. But what if the interest rates are really low? So when you increase money supply and then demand for money is very, very elastic, in fact, perfectly elastic. And the reason is that at low interest rates, there could be a possibility of liquidity, liquidity trap that happens. So if there's a liquidity trap situation that is happening, then any increase in money supply can result in the interest rates to not change. And if that's the case, then we will say that if there is, let me write this, if there is no change in R when money supply changes, then one could argue this that monetary policy will be ineffective. So what we argue is basically that demand for money matters a lot. The kind of shape the demand for money is. If the interest rates are really, really high, then monetary policy could be effective. But when the interest rates are extremely low, the demand for money is perfectly elastic. So the effectiveness of monetary policy is also dependent on how elastic the demand for money is to change in interest rates. According to the Keynesians, the demand for money is very elastic later on. If this is the case, then any rise in money supply will not change interest rates by that much. Once people believe that the interest rates will not go any lower, any further increase in money supply will have no effect on interest rates. And therefore, we call this liquidity trap. So that's why the first limitation of monetary policy is that it is not effective at a certain point of your demand for money. It's perfectly elastic. So that's the first drawback uh, of your monetary policy. Does that make sense, guys? So that's the first thing we want to talk about. That demand for money is extremely elastic at a certain point. Resume the recording. What I'm saying is just that this kind of a concept where the demand for money is perfectly elastic, only when this kind of a thing is happening, where the demand for money is kind of like perfectly elastic, is where you're going to see that money supply increases will not change interest rate. But in this zone of ours, like this zone of ours, you have a very responsive demand for money. Only in this zone, demand for money is perfectly elastic. And if the demand for money is perfectly elastic, then liquidity trap happens, where a rise in money supply may not have the effect on interest rates. Otherwise, we say whenever money supply goes up, you will see interest rate to change, but not always. And that's what we are saying, not always. Elastic means it's more responsive, right? Elastic means perfectly elastic means yes, more responsive, but यहाँ पे you're not looking at, you look at normally price effect on quantity, but ये perfectly elastic means perfectly flat curve. इसका मतलब ये है कि what we're saying here is just that perfectly elastic part of this part I'm drawing here, this part means your interest rate hasn't changed, but quantity can change much more. Got it? Was there? Look at the shape. Elastic doesn't mean interest rate changes. Elastic means changes in your quantity. Changes in your quantity is what we're talking about. Okay. This is a downward sloping, very inelastic curve, but inelastic in the sense the quantity does not change much. This is an elastic curve which quantity is changing. But we're looking at interest rates effect on things. Make sense? Are we good? Any questions? Okay, this brings us to the next idea, which is basically interest rates and investments. And therefore, Keynesians have an argument to make here. According to Keynesians, They believe that when you look at investment and interest rates, uh, they argue that uh, like investment is relatively unresponsive to changes in interest rates. Uh, in other words, very interest inelastic demand for investments. And they argue this, let me write this here, that they argue that other factors also play a crucial role than interest rates. What are the other factors that are playing a crucial role than interest rates? They say that interest rate ek taraf, but there are other factors. For example, what if tomorrow, I mean, what if coronavirus is happening? Do you think people should invest more in any business? I mean, I would love to invest more in, for example, a business which is probably producing soaps and masks and like your hand sanitizers and so on. But will I be investing in any other business? And the answer is maybe not. So the idea goes this, that yes, stock market did drop, but that could also be because of oil. But guys, what I'm trying to say here is just that sometimes other factor play a role. We know this. जब भी interest rate गिरता है, whenever interest rate go down, investment goes up. Why? Because the opportunity cost of investing is going down, the incentive to save is going down. But what if there is also a virus or pandemic is happening in the world? Then basically there will be what we call a low business slash consumer confidence. And because of that low business or consumer confidence, do you think there should be more investment happening in the world? And the answer is no. So, what the argument is that sometimes your demand for investment is interest inelastic. Even though interest rate may fall, investment may not go up by that much. You may not see investment to go up by that much because people believe other factors are crucial, such as your business confidence, or, for example, your uh, consumer confidence. These sometimes play so much of a role, because if the business or consumer confidence are low, even though your firms may want to invest when the interest rates are going down, but they may not do so because other factors are playing an important role. So what the second criticism we have, or limitation we have, is that maybe interest rates are not a powerful determinant of investment. Maybe other factors are more important. In other words, we say demand for investment is interest inelastic. Does that make sense? So that's what the second sort of argument is, that other factors like business confidence, consumer confidence may play a more important role. So business people are much more likely to be affected by state of the market for their product rather than by interest rates. Hence, the lower interest rates that result from expansionary monetary policy need not induce an increase in aggregate investment and consumption. Um, because firms and households' demand for investment consumption may not be too sensitive to low interest rates. So we argue that other factors may be playing a crucial role other than interest rates. Interest rates do play a role, but not as significant as the business conference or consumer conference, or the demand, or the market for the product, and so on. Okay, that's the second argument that is raised against, or the second limitation against your monetary policy. The third criticism we sometimes also uh, argue against monetary policy is this, that when your interest rates are going down, for example, you believe that because interest rates are going down, the savers will respond to it, and the sort of investors will respond to it. And once the savers and investors are responding to it, your savings will probably go down, consumption will go up, investment will go up, and that will basically cause AD to go up. But this this kind of like behavior of consumption and sort of investment to change may actually require many months of changes. It's not really easy for people who are saving for many, many years to suddenly stop saving. There is going to be something called time lags. So when interest rates fall, people do not immediately cut their savings. Only after households adjust their consumption and saving patterns, firms will react by changing output and there will be more investment, but this may take a lot more longer. And therefore, we say monetary policy doesn't really quickly affect the, the outcome of your economy. It may take some time. Aman is asking me what is demand for money at higher interest rate. What is demand for money? What do you mean by this? Demand for money at higher interest rate can be more responsive. Can be, you have more responsive demand for money. Aman, if you look at a higher interest rates, the demand for money is like pretty, pretty steep, but later on it's pretty flat. Make sense? But are we happy with the time lag argument, guys? Time lag argument says that it takes a little longer for the economy to start responding to changes in interest rates. People may take a little longer to respond to any changes in the economy's in the interest rates, because when your interest rate changes, then people are changing their consumption and saving patterns, and when they change their consumption and saving patterns, then the AD may change. So this AD is not really a quick change in AD. यहाँ आपने interest rate गिराए, as soon as you make the interest rate go down, will my AD go up quickly? And the answer is not necessarily. Okay. Last point that we need to understand is what we call mobility of financial capital. This is an argument that is raised that a lot of these developed countries, you have your developed sort of sophisticated sort of countries, like for example UK and the US, they have a financial market which is very mobile. In other words, they have very high mobility of financial financial funds. A lot of money easily transfer from one country to another. So let's say if interest rates in UK go up, what will happen? If interest rates in UK go up, the first thing you will be seeing is that hot money will flow in. And very easily too, guys, because remember, US and UK are very sophisticated market. Funds can easily go from one country to another, and you don't really worry about even like any frauds, or you don't worry about bankruptcies and all that. When hot money flows into UK because interest rates in UK are going up, then exchange rate will go up, and this rise in exchange rate will make their exports to become expensive and imports to become cheaper. And that in turn would mean your X minus M can actually go down. Isn't that true? In other words, your high interest rates can be detrimental to your net exports. And so one could argue this, that if your interest rates can easily change your trade position, look at this, interest rates is easily changing your trade position because there is a high mobility of financial capital, then you would argue that countries like UK or US or Japan may decide to keep interest rates maybe not very different. You don't want to keep a very different interest rate. Why? Because if you do keep it, then basically your exchange rate can get affected and ultimately your trade position can get affected. So what we say is this, that it can be difficult for country to have an interest rate that is significantly different from other countries. Why? Because a rise in interest rate can make hot money to flow into the country and can affect your exchange rate and therefore can affect your trade position. So what we argue is this, that monetary policy may be limited because countries may not want to keep their interest rate different because they may fear that hot money may flow in quickly and your exchange rate may go up and your trade position can get affected very, very severely in a very short span of time. So, one reason why monetary policy is not used commonly as a tool by developed economies is because of the strong sort of effect of higher interest rate on our trade position. Okay, so these are the four limitations of your monetary policy that I wanted to discuss today. Is there any question, guys? Why is it a limitation of monetary policy? Daniel is asking me. Daniel, because this means that if I keep any interest rates different from the other countries' interest rates, then basically I can get my trade position to get affected, which means that using monetary policy as a tool has a very strong implication on our trade, which means if this has a very strong implication of a trade, I may be very wary of using it as a tool. Make sense? Usman is asking me if I can explain the idea again. Basically, Usman, I'm saying this that there's a very high mobility of financial capital between developed countries. And if developed countries are keeping interest rate different from each other, so for example, you can decide to make the interest rate to be higher than the US, then they will receive money. When they receive money in terms of hot money, the exchange rate will go up. Higher exchange rate basically means that their X minus M ultimately will fall. And this is a big problem because then your country's competitiveness is getting affected because of your higher interest rates. So what do you can you afford to keep an interest rate different from other countries? And the answer is no, which means can you use monetary policy as an effective tool to change AD? And the answer is probably not. You may use something else, but not monetary policy, because monetary policy change key, interest rates changes, trade position changes. Got it? Does that make sense, guys? Any questions before we wrap up? Because next time we're going to do fiscal policy, but I'm done with today's class, which was all about the various sort of limitations of monetary policy. If you have any questions, you can ask, and we are otherwise done with the class as far as we're concerned.